In a sea of Class D cheap amplification from China, how does one company set themselves apart from the rest of the competition? Well, they do this. But I don't want to ruin it. This, my friends, is the Duke Audio A5. And it's got a couple of secrets up its sleeve. So sit down, grab a cup of coffee, and let's talk about the Duke Audio A5, its secrets, and why it's different than most Class D amplification. The Duke Audio A5 comes in at a paltry $99 right now, and I don't even think it's on sale. So maybe in the future it'll be $89 or $85. Either way, $100 for a Class D amplifier is not a terrible price. This has a 3255 amp chipset from Texas Instruments, which is probably the most widely used chipset in Class D amplification. And that is not a bad thing, because the 3255 amp chipset from Texas Instruments is probably the most dynamic, natural, analog sounding chip that has ever come out in the past 2 years. Maybe they have something new. 3256, 3257, 3260. Come on, Texas Instruments. If you are new here, please consider subscribing. It's super easy. You have unlimited subscriptions to donate. Right down here, next to the subscribe button, just click on it. It's really good. You can do it. Click on it. It makes me feel real nice. Thank you so much for watching. On the front, you will notice that there are two knobs, and this is secret number one. You have your volume knob, and it also acts as the power knob. So you click, click, and then you control the volume. On the right knob. On the left, by the way, this thing's built pretty well. It's metal. It's all metal. On the left, you have your first secret. The first thing about this amplifier that makes it different and kind of useful. We'll get into that at the end of the video, because I think this could have been implemented a little bit better. It is a high-pass filter. A lot of times when we have small, cheap speakers, we want to cut out some of the bass going to them so we don't blow them up and we get the best out of them. Because a lot of cheap speakers really shouldn't be going below 50 hertz. So just like the power knob, it clicks and it goes all the way up to 200 hertz over here. So it's not really, you don't really know what frequency it is, but you'll have to do it the old-fashioned way and listen. Listen to your speakers and turn it up or turn it down until you like the sound. And then you leave it there. But if you want the full range, you just roll it to the left and click it back off. On the back, very simple, all the way to the left, you have one set of RCA single-ended inputs. To the right of that, you have an auxiliary output. I wish it was a little bit different than that. To the right of that, you have your speaker binding post, and they're pretty cheap. But it's a cheap amplifier at $99. To the right of that, you have your power input. Since this is a 3255 chipset amp, you can put in a 24 volt all the way up to a 48 volt power supply. The one that I got came with a 32 volt power supply, which generally, in most cases, is enough. But I have so many of these little tiny amplifiers laying around that I have a bunch of 48 volt, 5 and even 10 amp power supplies. So I used a 48 volt just because I wanted to push this thing as far as it would go. How far did it go?
Back in that bag again. Whoa, yeah.
I had a lot of trust in this thing because I hooked it up to one of my favorite bookshelf speakers, the Q Acoustics 5020, which is not an inexpensive speaker. It comes in at $900 a pair. So this is what my system was. Wing Ultra digital optical output into the Duke Audio. I don't know what the DAC is. It's hooked up and I'm not going to pull it out to look at the back of it. Anyway, it's the DAC that has the Sabre chip and the AKM chip, and you can switch between the chips, which is kind of cool. Out of that, I had it going into the Duke Audio A5. And I was able to push this thing into the 90s, mid 90s actually, I think I peaked out at 98 dB. Now, some context here. I'm in my office, so I was probably only 5 feet away from the speakers. So in a larger room, you're not going to get 95 dB when you're sitting 12 feet away from the speakers. However, for a Class D amplifier of this footprint, of this size, getting over 90 dB is not terrible. On the sides, you also have some ventilation. So this thing does get pretty warm, but that's okay. Small footprint. In a design like this, a lot of times the case is actually part of the heatsink. So it'll get a little bit warm to the touch if you're really pushing it hard. The next really cool thing about this amplifier, and I think Duke Audio is onto something here, is a little glass top. And that glass top comes apart just like that. And you get access to the interior of the amplifier. Probably want to unplug it before you start to dig around in this amplifier. Take the power out, let it discharge for a little bit. Inside the amplifier, you have access to some op amps, so you can change out some op amps. Also inside the amplifier, it looks like there's a 6-pin thing with dip switches. 1, 2, 3 dip switches. I have no idea what that's for. And it just says on. Whatever that is. I don't know what that's for. I compare this to the Fosi Audio V3, the first one that came out. It comes in at $90 right now with a 10% off brand promotion. So the V3 is coming in at $81. This also has swappable op amps, but you have to get into it. A little bit more work to get into this one than to do that. Surprisingly, there is pretty big difference in the sound quality. The V3 from Fosi Audio was way more emphasized in the mid-range and top end and much less full on the bottom. And I can even see that in my decibel meter with the real-time analyzer. You just didn't see the big bumps in the bass with stuff like Intergalactic by the Beastie Boys. The V3, the one that's available for $90.99 with a 10% off brand promotion, also comes with a 3255 amp chipset. As I said before, I alluded to it, these things do better with a 48 volt power supply. And you can get them for around $50 to $70. So the value proposition when you're adding a 48 volt power supply goes a little bit down, but these things are still a lot of fun. The other cool thing about this amplifier is it's got a little bit of an LED inside, so you can see the interior. It glows. Very similar to the DAC that has the screen on the top. And I think Duke is on to something here, but they didn't quite pull it off like I wanted them to. There's a lot to like about this amplifier. Number one, I think it's more dynamic than the V3, and actually would be my preference as far as sound quality goes. Number two, it does have a high pass filter. The problem with that high pass filter is there is no subwoofer output on the back of this thing. It only has an auxiliary output, which means you're not going to be able to control the amount of voltage going into the subwoofer. And if you have a high pass filter, you kind of want to have a subwoofer, so there's no subwoofer output. Now, you can use something like the Weem Ultra that has its own subwoofer output, but it also has its own bass management, which means you don't really need the high pass filter on this anyway. I do like what they're doing here. And if you really want to push your speakers, having a high pass filter in some cases, I guess, would be somewhat usable. If you had a source like a DAC or a streamer that had a subwoofer output, then it would be really useful. But a lot of the products that I know of that have a subwoofer output generally also have their own bass management. Regardless, I wish they would have done the implementation like RSL did with the 225-1 amplifier. Because on the back of this amplifier, not only does it have a switchable high-pass filter, granted it's only at 90 Hertz, but it has a subwoofer output. So to be kind of perfect, this needs a preamp out or subwoofer output instead of an auxiliary output. I like the build quality. I like the sound. I like the easy access to the op amps. I like the high pass filter. I just think they missed the mark when they didn't include a subwoofer output. All in all, I think this is a fun, cool product. Another thing I don't love about it is it's not the same footprint as their DAC that has kind of a see-through top case. Duke Audio is onto something with this design and the cohesiveness of actually having a see-through top. I know it's a bit of a gimmick, but hey, it's a fun gimmick. Also, I wish they would have had switchable LEDs so that you could match up the LED on your see-through DAC with the LED on your see-through amp. They're getting close, and with a few tweaks, I think this would be a great product. As it stands, though, it's a product that has some features that are usable in some applications. I still think it's a good value. I wish it came with a 48-volt power supply. Even if it did and it pushed the price up to about $130 or $140, I wouldn't really mind. If you like this video, you need to check out my video about my favorite amplifiers under $500. I will link it right here. So don't binge watch anything on Netflix or Hulu. Binge listen, maybe through your Duke Audio A5, and fill your soul with happiness. And with that, I'm Randy. I'm the Cheap Audio Man.